what you guys thought of Dan Ghosty's performance this weekend, because obviously a lot of people are still on the fence about him. But there's a non-negotiable conversation that's kind of been going on when it comes to statistics, and I feel like it's always been like this in COD, where the scoreboard doesn't show everything. To what extent does that come true when it comes to these series where Dan maybe has 10 kills and it's a more rough performance like that? Is there justification that if those 10 kills are significant enough and he's doing the right thing and that he's still playing a good game, or would you still say that that's a bad game?
I mean, if they're winning, it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, if you're putting up like bozo stats where you're -12, -10, like you're not contributing much. But the thing is, what Dan brings to this team is those intangibles. Every time you go to a listen in, he's talking a lot and he's trying to direct traffic. And if you talk to any of the OpTic guys, the reason they got rid of iLLeY, it wasn't strictly off stats. It was literally off of all the other stuff. The stuff that you expected iLLeY to bring to the team, they felt like he was not bringing. Like, he was not calming a lot. Shotzzy was literally the motor mouth of that team prior. Also the S&D stuff, like he was sniping all these rounds and he wasn't like producing every time. Like, they just felt like they needed somebody else to fill those shoes, somebody that wanted to fill those shoes and was ready to fill them. And they ended up with Dan. Granted, Dan's not putting up the numbers that you would expect from him, especially looking at his challenger stats. They don't necessarily need that on a consistent basis. I think the reason why this team hasn't looked as good this stage isn't necessarily because of Dan. You could argue that maybe Ghosty isn't enabling the team like iLLeY was to an extent. But that's maybe more so like a time will tell type of conversation. But I think the reason this team has kind of just been like struggling a little bit is just mainly Dashy, bro. Like, Dashy, when iLLeY was on the team and that last split, back to back hymns, a word to Pat, he was just breaking records, world starring everyone. But now you've seen a performance dip out of him where he's not doing that, and you're getting more so the best out of a player like Huke. And I feel like that's maybe the only conversation you can have. I feel like outside of that, like, Dan has been contributing. He's been putting up decent enough numbers, like maybe nothing crazy, but he's putting in a lot of damage most of the time. He's got a lot of assists. He's got a lot of time. Like, he's doing the dirty work for the team and he's filling the gaps. They haven't been able to transition that to W's. And I'm not going to sit here and act like, oh, these guys are now going to be the best team in the game. But we'll see. We'll see how these guys have improved. I'm not gonna shit on Dan though. I don't think, like, dude, Dan's thrown into OpTic. Like, he's not. He needs some time, bro. I think he's fine though. I think he's fine where he's at right now.
I mean, performance 2 is very like, someone could go 10 and 20 like Dan did in this thing. If they win the map, like, who cares? Like, people shrug it off. But if he goes 10 and 20 and they lose the map, it's like, damn, that guy just costed them the match. And I think that's always going to be the case. So I don't know. For me, at least, comparing to the iLLeY thing, like, regardless of play styles, I don't necessarily think iLLeY was a problem on this team. I think there's more to it than the story we got.
Yeah.
And I think they just had to make a change. I mean, you got to think they were trying to replace Huke, then they were trying to get ACHES. Like, this team has been trying to make changes. So Dan Ghosty just ended up being the one. I am curious though, because from what I heard, at least in challengers before you joined this OpTic team, he was like averaging like 1.35s in challengers, just absolutely frying people. And so it is a little weird to see like the dynamic shift of like, well, he's supposed to be the, like, well, I guess he was in challengers like this, you know, super talented rookie who's just world starring everybody, to coming into a professional team and playing the, like, I'm gonna make the plays to get us the win role versus like the superstar role. And then obviously, yeah, like, Dashy's performance has massively fallen off since they made this move. So it is interesting. I think it's just more of a, I want to see what happens on land, because Dashy on land specifically was really where he was like him that whole weekend.
Yeah.
And I think that's what elevated them to get top 4. And so we'll see if he can replicate that. And if not, how much impact it has on how Ghosty plays, and see if one of them can can elevate them and make
Yeah,
a run.
I still think Dan has it in him to play at that level. Maybe not like fucking 1.3s, but to play a good AR role.
But I think that's the question, right? Like,
He's
if he
just-
is playing that Slayer role, does it hurt Shotzzy? Does it hurt Huke? Do you know what I mean? Does it like
Exactly,
change
so- I think when he joined the team, he's like, because you don't see these guys practice every day, but I've talked to them and they say like their practice is usually going really well. I know a lot of teams say that, but I'm not gonna like. I don't think Dan's gonna bullshit me here, and I feel like whatever he's doing, in this practice, he's trying to transition it to matches, and I think he understands the people he's playing with. Like going, if you're an amateur, bro, and you get on a team like OpTic and you're playing with Dashy, Huke, and Shotzzy, like you're not going in with the mentality like I got to be everything. Like you're just not. And Dan's a smart kid, so he's probably not like going out there trying to do that. He's just trying to make sure that he's securing the win, and whenever he gets into these spots, he's making good decisions and making sure that he's contributing. So
the problem with that, and Chris, I know you know this, is like let's say he doesn't have a successful season with OpTic, and OpTic drop him at the end of the year, right? Just hypothetically. Well, because he took this back seat, didn't show out how good he was. We've talked about it. This isn't a role players league. Like, role players do not get picked up by other teams. They're not the stars people go after. And so if he elects to play that backseat role, they don't have a good season. Like, I feel like it could, hinder him.
It could definitely hinder him to a degree.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
If I'm him, I'm not trusting this OpTic organization to keep me on, especially knowing how many moves they've tried to make. They tried to get pred. From what we've heard, they're probably still going to try and get pred in the offseason, if not Sib as well. So it's like for him to come in, play a backseat role, basically make himself look worse in a sense to try and get the win for this OpTic team. Then he gets released. He might find himself back in challengers, and
that's kind of tough.
If I'm him, if I'm him, that's a
you know what's
super
crazy,
shitty
man.
outcome.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Drazah, man. Drazah, whenever he first got on like the Thieves and all that stuff, and he was up and down. He didn't know if he was going to be on the roster moving forward, going into like Vanguard and stuff like that. Like he was very insecure about his spot. He was in the same boat, dude. Drazah was not putting up superstar performances. Drazah was very much a role filler, like a gap filler type of player. And then they ended up kind of believing in him and re-signed him, and then they ended up winning champs. So, I mean, like he could definitely find himself in that boat where he gets insecure about his spot and maybe he's not playing up to that performance. But, bro, if they get results, like unless he's throwing up the actual bullshit, like I'm sure he's going to improve as a player. And he's going to start playing maybe a little bit better statistically. But, I mean, only time will tell. Hopefully for his sake, that's not what happens to him. But, yeah, I could see the issue with that, Pat. Because, yeah, it's definitely not a role players league, bro. It's definitely not a role players league.
Yeah, and I mean, and we're going to have to see how he plays on land in front of the green wall.